Please.
What is it?
Next Thursday, the same time.
No, I couldn't possibly.
Please. I ask you most humbly.
You'll miss your train.
All right.
Run.
Goodbye.
I'll be there.
Thank you, my dear.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, its history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roca. I'm a voiceover artist, writer, producer, and host, and owner and CEO of the Outlaw Nation. I'm excited, cautiously excited to talk about this movie with Steve Morris. This is a movie that Steve Morris recommended to me. He wanted to put it on the Cine-Files, and I know it comes with a lot of accolades and awards. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion.
I get the sense that you didn't love it.
Love is not the word I would use, but I want to enjoy the movie through your eyes as we talk about it.
It's funny, as we're watching it, Karen predicted that John's not going to like this movie. Well, in the movie we're talking about, this came up in a really interesting way, which is that all of you who listen to the Cine-Files have probably noticed that, man, we took a serious journey into the 80s over the last month or so, and it actually isn't over. There's more that are in the can. I'm not sure exactly what order they're going to come out in, but it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't intentional. Some of it came up because there was a guest that we really wanted. Some of it came up because we actually talked about it in the Cine-Files and said, let's do it. Some of it came up because there was Brian Dennehy had passed away, and so that led us to do Silverado. But I said, you know what, we really need to get out of the 80s. And we've talked about for a long time the idea of every once in a while, most of the movies that we do, both of us have seen. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, there's a movie that only one of us has seen. And that's always really interesting. And so I said, well, why don't we do something a little bit more obscure, something we know the other one hasn't seen? And this was my pick, which was 1945, Brief Encounter, directed by David Lean, written by Noel Coward. This film is regularly ranked in the top 10 British films of all time. At one point, it reached the number 2 British film of all time, and frequently ranked in the top romantic films ever made. It's a movie that I love. And I might as well say how I first came to this film, and then because I know how you came to it. Yeah. How I came to the film was, it was in that, as we said, that era for me was the early 90s of the first burgeoning cinephile thing where I started tracking down movies of directors I loved. Lawrence of Arabia was already one of my favorites, if not my favorite movie of all time, and I loved Bridge on the River Kwai and Dr. Zhivago and even Passage to India, and I went, let's find out some more David Lean movies. And I heard about this Brief Encounter movie, and it was right when Karen and I had started dating. We started dating in 1991, and so we watched this one together on VHS in our apartment in Lafayette, and both of us absolutely loved it. And we watched it multiple times in that era, and it was one of those movies that we showed to other people because we just were so moved by it. And I hadn't seen it probably in 10 years when we sat down to watch it a couple days ago, and it still had the same kind of wallop and effect on me that it has had in the past. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. Well, and actually, it's really different because when I watched it the first few times, I was in young love. Right. And when I watch it now, I've been married for almost 23 years. Yeah. And the situation is very, very different. So, John, how did you come to this film?
Now it's you and Karen having separate internal dialogues about your own meetings, clandestine meetings, possibly on the side. I saw this one yesterday. I ended up getting the Criterion Channel app, put it on the Roku, got on the trial for 14 days. It was one of the choices there. It's a quick, breezy 85-minute movie. It's not that long, which is really unusual for a David Lean film. And watched it yesterday, and it took me a couple of breaks to finish it out. I'll be honest with you. I found it to be an interestingly dated movie for me, and I love black and white movies. I'll go back and watch black and white movies like nobody's business, but there's something about this one that I found a little difficult to connect to. I don't know if it was the elevated dialogue, the elevated accents. I don't know if it was that time and place where it was set. But I did find little things to enjoy, though. So I will say that about the movie, the characters and what happens. And it is a snapshot of a time in our history and in British history for sure that is long gone. So it's kind of was enjoyable to visit that kind of time or that era.
I feel you really stretching to be nice here.
Well, because I want to respect the fact that it's a movie that both you and Karen enjoy and love, and I tried to like it. I even started watching it again this morning for like a half an hour, 45 minutes. And I'm like, what am I missing something? Was it the end of a long day? Am I just not hyped? And I still was like, no, this is one that it feels distant. It feels like I can't connect to the characters, and everyone is speaking up here and speaking of this way, and oh no, I would never. And it's just like I didn't find the connection as strongly as I have in films in the past that are British and black and white, and kind of get their hooks in me. But it was what I would say this. It was a beautifully tragic story, which I thought didn't cop out and didn't cheat the ending, which was great. That was great. Like, you thought, oh, they'll find a way. But in the end, they don't. And because they don't, that makes the film all the more powerful and tragic.
Did you watch it? Did you watch it with Lindley?
No, she's still in San Diego. She comes back today. I don't know if she would enjoy it too, even though she's a big Anglophile. I don't know if this is her cup of tea, but maybe I'll sit down with her for like half an hour to see if she likes it or not. It's certainly possible.
It's obviously, I certainly don't want to force you to rewatch a movie that you didn't like and even tried a second time once. That doesn't seem like a good friend, but I'd be curious to hear what she thought of it.
Well, to be fair, it wasn't unpleasurable to try to watch it a second. It's not an unpleasurable movie in any way, shape, or form. I just feel that it's distant. That's all for me.
So this is it's an interesting collaboration between Noel Coward and David Lean. It's based on a Noel Coward one-act called Still Life. And of course, Noel Coward, for those of you who don't know, he was the biggest British playwright of his age. He started off as an actor. He was born in the late 1800s. And decided that he wasn't getting good parts as an actor, so he said, "I'm going to write myself some good parts." He started to become a hit playwright in the 20s and acted in all his plays. Still Life was like a 40-minute one act about these two people. It only took place in the refreshment room at the train station. It had none of the other characters. It wasn't in flashback structure, and Noel Coward played the Alec character, and that was in 1935, and a whole bunch of people are pushing him at this point to put his plays into movies, and he was very resistant. And in the 40s, they even start pushing him to direct. Why? Well, if you won't let us make a movie, why don't you come and be the director? You've directed a lot of theater, and you can make the movie. And he's like, I don't know anything about this. Cameras and lighting and sound and all that stuff. He doesn't know how to do it. And that's how David Lean came along. So David Lean was born a Quaker, and when he was born, movies were considered to be sins. So he never was allowed to see them. So what did he do? He snuck out of school regularly to go see movies. His father was an accountant and wanted him to follow in the family tradition. And he did. And he became an accountant. He says possibly the worst accountant in history. And it didn't work very well. And he finally gets into the film industry just before the tradition to sound pictures. And he did everything. He worked on wardrobe. He worked on production design. He worked as an assistant to everybody. He did everything he could think of. He did the slate. He did camera assistant. Right. But the biggest thing he did was he started in the editing department. And because he was technically minded, when the sound transition started happening and people had to figure out how to sync sound, he was one of the few people who could do it, who understood the technology. And what's so funny about this is a similar thing happened right when I was getting out of film school, because that's when we were making the transition from editing film cutting it and actually splicing the physical film to digital editing. And so the crew that came out of my generation in the mid to late 90s are the first young people who really knew the computer technology. And so all the old editors hired young assistants who could do the computer stuff. And that's how a lot of people I know became editors. Anyway, he started to work as an assistant director, particularly on a bunch of Shaw movies like Pygmalion and Major Barbara, and did a lot of people thought that he really directed big parts of Major Barbara. And
Robert Shaw, so you mean, right? Or George Bernard Shaw. Sorry, George Bernard Shaw. Right, just for those who maybe haven't read his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I was thinking recently about My Fair Lady. I don't know if
yeah.
you like that movie.
Henry Higgins, yes.
Yeah. Just a thought.
Oh,
Speaking of
okay.
Shaw. Speaking of Shaw.
Yeah. Good.
We haven't done a musical in a while, so
True. Very true.
And they said, well, you know what we want? We have a bunch of low budget pictures. Why don't you direct one of these? And David Lean said no. And it's so interesting thinking of the studio going, David Lean is the perfect person to direct our low budget B movies. But he says no, and it's this moment all comes together when he is emerging as someone they want to start as a young director, and Coward is looking for someone to come along who understands the technical side of filmmaking. And so they approach David Lean and say, would you be willing to help out? And David Lean says, I'll do it on one condition. I want co-directing credit with Coward. And Coward says, all right.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And
props to David Lean. Props to David Lean for having the stones to be like, no, I'm going to do this, and I'll do it under this condition. Respect, man.
Yeah. So the first one he did. So they do a movie called In Which We Serve, and this is very much a World War II military pro-British kind of movie, and Coward acts in it as well, and slowly but surely he starts to relinquish control and realize he can really trust this guy.
Yeah.
Next, they make This Happy Breed. They're both really good movies, by the way. And then in 1945, they go, well, we're going to do what is arguably one of Coward's best plays, which is Blithe Spirit, which is a really, really funny comedy. And Coward is out of the country for a fair amount of the shooting. So really, this is David Lean directing it. Yeah. And he comes back and basically says, you've ruined my greatest piece of writing.
Wow.
He hated the Blithe Spirit that David Lean made.
Wow.
But then, I mean, he ripped him to pieces. And it sounds like Noel Coward was the guy that you really didn't want to get on the wrong side of. Yep. He was pretty articulate. And but then after that, he says, you know what? You are the most resilient young man I've ever met. Because David Lean took the abuse and just shrugged it off. And he says, okay, we'll do one more movie together. And that's how Brief Encounter comes about. And again, Coward left the country. So he really wasn't there. David Lean really was in charge of this. The one thing that did happen was they continually needed new script stuff. So they'd send Noel Coward a telegram and they'd say, we need 30 seconds here. And Noel Coward would write back, here's 30 seconds, and if you want it to be 24 seconds, you can take out this phrase, and if you want it to be 38 seconds, you can add this phrase in.
Wow.
That's how on the ball Noel Coward was about
Very
this
considerate. Very considerate, yeah.
Before we get into the movie, there's one thing I have to say. This is a really weird movie. It breaks one of the cardinal laws of screenwriting and filmmaking, which is, well, it's not wall-to-wall voiceover. It is a lot of voiceover.
It is. I think that's what it took me out of it, Steve. I was just like, you're just telling me a story. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the make or break for the film. Yeah. If you like listening to Celia Johnson's voice and enjoy the language and enjoy sort of the internal thought process of this character, you're going to be in. And if this puts you off, you're going to be out.
But it's an internal thought process that she never relays to her husband. Except in that one ending moment, which takes him realizing that she was drifting off, not in a way like to go to sleep, but drifting off out of the marriage possibly, and him thanking her for coming back. But through the entire thing is her confession is essentially to the audience in the guise of confessing what happened within herself and not to him. So it's interesting.
I get the sense that bugs you.
Well, we'll get to it as we talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to say is, like one of the things I always struggle with doing these podcasts is how much detail do I want to give and how much do you guys want to listen to my voice telling this story? And this is going to be a difficult one because I do love the language, but listening to me or even playing tons and tons of the narration is not going to be made for an entertaining podcast. So it'll be a little bit of a struggle for me to figure it out. But the movie opens with just a spectacular shot of a train blasting through a station. Apparently that train is going 100 miles an hour. It was really important to David Lean that it's a steam train, and it looks gorgeous.
Yeah.
And let's be real clear. David Lean loves trains. Mm-hmm. In his greatest films, all of them have beautiful, beautiful train sequences. Lawrence blowing up the train, Bridge on the River Kwai blowing up the bridge, and beautiful train sequences in Zhivago. And I think there's trains in Passage to India as well.
Okay.
I think. I don't remember that movie as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so yeah.
The sound of the train going through the station is just like a scream. And that screech fades perfectly into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Which is the music for the entire film. And it's one of my absolute favorite pieces of classical music. I learned about it because of this movie. It is on when I sit down and write. I can't write while listening to music with lyrics because it distracts me. And Rachmaninoff is in the top 5 or 6 pieces of music that I play. Wow. The train goes through, and there's that Doppler effect into a sound cue into real sound, and we see the station manager check his watch, and this is a character we're going to see a lot of. This, by the way, was shot at Camforth Railway Station in Lancashire. And one of the things about this, it's far enough out of town. This is middle of World War II. It's far enough from the big cities that they didn't have to obey the blackout laws. So they could shoot with lights at night, which you couldn't in London because everything was blacked out because of the Blitz.
Yeah.
And this guy goes inside to talk to the woman behind the counter. This is Stanley Holloway, who plays Albert, the station manager, and he's talking to Myrtle, which is Joyce Carey, the person who runs the refreshment stand. Stanley Holloway, probably the biggest star in this movie.
Wow.
He was a well-known character actor, had been in tons of films and all sorts of stuff, very beloved, as opposed to Celia Johnson, who had been in a couple of movies, and Trevor Howard, where this is his first lead.
Right.
And what's going to happen with them is there's going to be a whole bunch of chat, flirting between these two characters. Yeah. It's very kind of mid-lower class British humor, and I'm going to ignore almost all of it.
Yeah.
It's a really weird thing because it's the secondary, it's the B plot, and it's sort of a love story between these two characters, and it acts in contrast to what we're going to see between our main characters.
Right. Well, it's the love story that can go on.
Yep.
Versus the love story that can't. Right.
But in terms of like going over what their dialogue is and what they're talking about and what the evolution of their romance, I don't think it's important to our discussion today.
Yeah, sure.
I'll put it that way.
I agree.
And as we hear them chatting along, the camera pans off of them, and we see this couple sitting at a table drinking tea, and that is Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard.
Yeah.
And we can see that something's going on.
Yeah, can we take a moment? I think this is a really brilliant move by David Lean. Like, once again, I may not have liked the movie overall or have it affect me, but you can still speak about it in its technical approach. And I think this is brilliant because he fools you with the camera, because they have been sitting there the whole time while this banter's been going on, right? That's the assumption when we finally see them. And then the camera just kind of quietly moves to that corner of the restaurant to hear them speaking back and forth. And I think that's so nice the way he does that, because he unsettles you. And look, the train coming through the scream, that is like symbolic, like a mother, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a speeding train is their relationship. How she feels wanting to leave that relationship is a speeding train. The fact that speeding train comes back at the end where she almost kills herself, that's a fact. There's so much that you will appreciate about that speeding train later. But of course, a master director understands why they're putting something in the film, because they know people will appreciate it when they think about it later. And I think it's a great way to start. It unsettles you. Then you have this weird banter between it's almost Mamet-esque, the banter between the coffee shop lady or the freshman stand lady and the station manager, back and forth. And then we moved quietly to these two. These are the two characters we're supposed to take seriously. The other two characters are kind of a little cartoonish, or caricaturish at times, but we move over to them, and they're having a very, what you can sense is almost a very melancholy exchange between them.
Well, And this goes to something we talked about over and over again, which is all movies are mysteries.
Yeah.
And in this moment, the camera's just moved. This is an unmotivated camera move. There's nothing on the screen that's telling us to move. You're very aware of it. It goes and looks at these people who aren't talking. You can feel there's some heaviness going on, but you don't know what it is. And just as you're kind of thinking about that, in walks this woman who recognizes Laura, the Celia Johnson character, and just sits down as you do and says, "Oh, good to see you." And she is a perfect chatter.
My dear, I've been shopping till I'm dropping. My feet are nearly off, my throat's parched. I thought of having tea at Spindle's, but I was terrified of losing the train. Oh, dear.
She's one of those people who has a stream of words coming out of her mouth, and the look of disappointment and emotion that happens on our two characters when this woman sits down and she asks, they make some introductions, and she asks, "Oh, could you get me a cup of coffee to Trevor Howard? I'm just so tired." And he goes, "Okay." And he gets up and, which is all perfectly normal behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, I find her irritating, which is, of course, on purpose, but there's nothing abnormal going on. And she says,
My dear, what a nice-looking man. Who on earth is he, really? You're quite a dark horse. I shall telephone Fred in the morning and make mischief.
Now, she just thinks she's making a joke.
Right.
And, of course, we don't know, because we just started this movie, what the heck is going on.
Right.
But as you watch, the way the movie's structured, which we don't know yet, but we'll find out, is it's a very strange flashback structure, is that what we'll find out is this is the man that she's fallen in love with and that she was very close to having an affair with, or does have an affair, depending on how you define your terms. So her saying, "I shall telephone Fred in the morning and make mischief," is actually attacking directly at her guilt. And he comes back, and there's talk about, the sugar, and the sugar's in the spoon, and it's just totally ordinary talk.
Yeah.
So the dialogue is on one level where it's completely not important.
Right.
But emotionally, you feel like something really is important.
Yeah. Just on her face and his face, that something bigger is happening here, that this woman has interrupted. Yeah.
And then we hear the bell and the announcement for his train. And one of the things that's really interesting, but it sort of hit me harder this time, is there's the contrast between the romantic world and the real world. And the bells of the train and the schedule of the train is almost always the time to go back to the real world.
Oh, yeah. Good call.
Yeah. And the thing about a train schedule is is locked in. You cannot change, no matter how much you want to do something else. The train leaves when the train leaves.
Yeah.
And one of the things in this movie is the struggle between the romantic notion of your life and what has to be.
Right.
What you have to do.
Well, it's a dream, right? The train whistles are essentially an alarm waking you up from a dream every single time.
That's exactly right. And we realize it's his train, and there is a look between them that are just profound, although you don't know what's going on. And I love this moment as he goes, "Okay, I guess I have to go." And then he, in a shot on her, he puts his hand on her shoulder. And her face, she has an amazing face, by the way.
Well, she won the Best Actress Oscar for this, so yeah.
I don't think she won.
Oh, she was nominated? She didn't win. My
She
bad.
won.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I think it's this is the Best Year of Our Lives year.
Oh,
and I think it's what's her name? I forget.
Right.
Anyway, and this is, I mean, it's interesting that David Lean started as an editor, and this is just what's so interesting about this film. I've seen the other Noel Coward ones before this. This is where you see the master filmmaker come out. This is where that person who really understands where to put the camera and putting the camera right there on her face and seeing his hand come in. We know, even though we know nothing about what's going on, that something's up.
Yeah.
And he leaves and she watches him go. And again, Lean puts the camera in the perfect place. It's her point of view of the door as he exits. And just as he exits, this woman sits into frame and starts chatting.
Talking of missing trains reminds me of that awful bridge at Broadham Junction. You've got to go traipsing all up one side, along the top and down the other.
And she goes on and on. And actually, if you want to learn how to write good British middle-class gossipy dialogue, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But none of it is important.
Right.
Because what's important is happening under the surface. And then we hear another bell for another train. And our friend asks, "Oh, is that our train?" It's like, "No, that's the express." And she says, "Oh, of course, that doesn't stop, does it?" And she goes off to get some chocolates. So she goes to the counter And we see the express train go by in the windows, and we hear the sound. And when she turns around, Laura is gone. The seat is empty.
Yeah.
And then Laura comes back in. And again, it's a perfectly framed shot. The shot's in a wide shot. We see in focus, there's like chairs in the foreground, and the focus point is not at the door. So when Laura comes back into the room, she's just the tiniest bit out of focus.
Yeah.
Which again is a great choice. And she looks shook. We don't know what's going on. We don't know why she's upset. She says she feels sick. They get her some brandy. And then it's time for their train. And they get into the train. And she sits down, still not looking good.
I really am very worried about you, dear. You look terribly peaky.
I'm all right, really I am.
And this is as you do.
Yeah.
You always go, no, I'm okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. That's what we all do all the time. How many times have you said, no, I'm fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
When you weren't fine.
Because you don't want to be a bother.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to handle whatever it is happening. And you certainly don't want to be irritated by other people trying to solve what's going on with you, because you're inside your own body and you know what works for you and what doesn't. Yeah.
Well, and it's just private, you know?
Private. Yeah, that too. That's very much so. Yes.
And then she talks about the guy.
Well, he certainly was very good looking.
Who?
Well, your friend, Dr. whatever his name was.
Yes, he's a nice creature.
Have you known him long?
No, not very long. I hardly know him at all, really.
And that line is a discovery for her.
Yeah.
You know, that this person that obviously means so much, she's only known, Karen and I counted it. She's known him, met him, she knows him 7 weeks. That's how long this movie takes place.
Yeah.
And of that time, the first 2 times is like for a minute.
Right.
Each week. And then it's like, you know, maybe she spent 2 days with him, 2 or 3 days with him.
Right.
Very little time. She doesn't know him at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Steve. And this is the time when movies, like, people fall in love on the first sight in a lot of movies at the time in the 40s, 50s too. It's like 2 or 3 dates and you're married. You know, this happens a lot in movies from that time. So the idea with us looking back from 2020 that they only knew each other for 4 or 7 weeks, for us, that seems way too soon to be saying the L word. But maybe back then it wasn't, right? Remember, like you said, the idea of the war, I don't think it's set during World War II, but it feels like it's just right before World War II.
Yeah, it's set right before.
Yeah, right before. So there's this feeling of like, you know, there's this sense of impending doom in the air maybe. And so there's this desire to connect, to find something. And so although it may seem short, it certainly feels authentic to both of them.
I think the choice is made in 45. So, you know, England's been through a lot of war. And the choice, I think it's set in 37.
Okay.
The choice to set it pre-war is really important. And one of the things of this movie, you know, what's happening during the war is that you have soldiers who are out in, you know, away from home, and they might be having dalliances with people that are not their spouses. And you have wives who are on the home front, and they might be having these things. So even though we're not at the war, we're actually dealing with, because one of the things this movie does is that it is 100% a love at first sight movie. That is what it is. Yeah. But what it does is it says, you know, there can be 2 worlds that we live in, and it doesn't vilify either of them.
Yeah, that's a strong point you make, Steve. The film director and the movie itself does not judge either of them for what they do. Absolutely. Which allows you to turn off the judgment a little bit. You can still judge it, obviously, if you feel like it, but the movie doesn't encourage your judgment. And I think that's a positive about the film, for sure.
Yeah, it's the movie steps back and says it certainly doesn't condemn anyone.
Right.
So Celia Johnson was Lean's only choice for this part. He decided that this is it. She's not a big star. She'd acted in one of the previous movies with Noel Coward. He said the thing about her that was so great was her power of concentration. He said she could make you cry reading the yellow pages.
Wow.
And what she said was she wrote in a letter of that she loved the part. It's her favorite part she ever had in her life, not surprisingly. And that what she liked when she got offered the part, she's like, well, first, she narrates the whole movie. So she said, this is what she said. So if they don't have my beautiful face to look at, they have my mellifluous voice to listen to.
That word does not get used enough.
Mellifluous.
Good word.
Good word. And now we get, which I talked about at the very beginning, is the camera starts to push in on her, and we start to hear her voiceover.
I wish I could trust you. I wish you were a wise, kind friend, instead of a gossiping acquaintance I've known casually for years and never particularly cared for.
I'm not going to name any names, but I have friends who are really acquaintances that I've known casually for years and never particularly cared for. You know?
Okay.
I mean,
I'm sure we all have those.
we all have those.
Yeah.
And this moment,
And I'm sure we're in that category for other people as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
I am certain of it. I even have guesses as who those people are.
Okay.
You know, because that's the reality. And what part of what this movie is about is that she has, in many ways, the most important thing ever to happen to her in her life.
Yeah.
Is this experience, and she will never in her life get to talk to anyone about it.
No, right. Except the audience. And again, the woman's still talking, blah, blah, blah. And we hear that the guy is moving and going to Africa. And then we have the close-up on her lips as she's talking. And again, I've been in this situation where someone just won't shut up. And that's what we hear. She says,
I wish you'd stop talking. I wish you'd stop prying and trying to find things out.
and then she says,
I wish you were dead. No, I don't mean that. That was silly and unkind.
Yeah, and this is where we get to the point where this is why I can't connect to the film in this way. It feels like a Reader's Digest, and I'm just like, to me, that's. And oh, look, I'm not. Noel Coward fans are probably like, ready to tear me apart by saying that, but like that particular thing, right? Because the voiceover comes out of nowhere. It really comes out of nowhere before we've even been established that this is a person we should care about. All of a sudden, we're into this woman's world and into this woman's mind and the things she's saying. And she is being unkind, but also telling us what she really thinks, what she really feels about this person. Wishing death seems very extreme just because she's a chatterbox, but she yanks herself back a little bit. She just says, I just wish you stopped talking. But of course, what we find out later, and that's what's, maybe this is, and I was hoping this would happen. As I spoke with you about the movie, I would start to appreciate it better and more. And yeah, this is something in this moment, when you go back and talk about it now or watch it again, the reason she says death is because she's in an extremely emotional state of mind, in her mind, having lost this incredible love of her life and then having to be on a train with this person. So can you falter for sliding into an extreme reaction and wishing death on the chatty woman just for a second before yanking it back? And you really can't.
Well, we're going to do something that we always do on the Cine-Files, which is we spoil everything.
Yes, true.
And while this isn't exactly a movie with a big twist like Fight Club or something, this is a movie where we see one of the amazing constructs of the film is that the scene that we saw when when we entered the movie and this woman came and sat down with them is the scene we're going to see at the end of the movie.
Yep.
And we're going to work our way back to it. And the moment at which the express train went by and she disappeared for a moment and then comes back in feeling faint, she was inches away, millimeters away from killing herself.
Yeah.
So the I wish you were dead, this is 10 minutes after she almost killed herself.
Exactly.
And so we can have a reaction like, oh my God, like what's going on with this person? But as we sort of fill in the blanks of what this is, it's a big deal. And then and it's what's funny too. One other thing I should say. One of the basic rules of screenwriting is show don't tell. We've talked about it over and over again on the Cine-Files. We definitely talked about the fact that people using narration and voiceover to explain the feelings of their characters is absolutely amateurish screenwriting. You should never do it. It's wrong that we should be seeing what they're feeling. And if you just have someone going, I am really upset right now. I hated that person you'd be like, I as a teacher would go, no, you can't do that. Cut it all. It's terrible. And this movie is all of that. That's all it is. And somehow, because of Noel Coward's amazing writing and because of what Lean is doing with the camera and because of Celia Johnson, man, and her face, I'm in, and it works for me. And it might not work for everybody.
This can't last. This misery can't last. Nothing lasts, really. Neither happiness nor despair. Not even life lasts very long. There'll come a time in the future when I shan't mind about this anymore. When I can look back and say quite peacefully and cheerfully how silly I was.
I want to talk about that thought first.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that. I've had that recently. You know, I don't know, but I do mostly feel better in the morning.
Yeah.
I do usually feel better after I exercise. You know, and so there are so many times where I'm like, I know I feel this way. It will not last. I know I will feel better at some point, and try to hold hope in that moment. You know,
You mean like you get dark thoughts or depression or sad thoughts or whatever? Is that what you mean?
or angry or frustrated or feeling, all of that stuff. I mean, we all do,
Right,
you know,
right,
at one time or another. And there are times where I'm just like, okay, you feel this way. It will not, I know from experience, it's so far has never lasted.
Right.
I will regain, for me, I call it regaining my equilibrium. You know, I have a pretty good equilibrium and I usually get back to it pretty quick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get to it, but we know, I've mentioned many times the 2016, the 5 months of severe depression. Every morning I felt suicidal for the first 3 to 4 hours every morning. But every morning I'd have to power through meditation or music or whatever to distract me, because I knew by 9 or 10 o'clock, I'd find the equilibrium and I'd be okay for the rest of the day. But those first 4 to 5 hours every morning were torture, absolute torture. But you just keep repeating the mantra to yourself. If I can just get to here, I think I'll be okay for the day. You know what I'm saying? So now it rarely happens now, thank God. But I remember those days and I'll never, ever forget them. So I absolutely think that a lot of us have that, where we just go, let me just get through this. And once I get through this, I know it'll calm itself down and I'll be all right. You know?
Well, and this is the thing about the voiceover, which is that, yes, it's wrong in terms of screenwriting craftsmanship, but I don't think you could get this particular thought pattern any other way.
Right, because you don't set it up that you can. There is no friend she can talk to release this exposition. So you have to have her talk to the audience. Yeah.
Well, and anytime we're talking, even if you have anytime we're talking to someone else, we have beat work and motivation and what does the character want and all that stuff and their relationship with the other person. This is all stripped away. This is just the stream of consciousness in her mind. And the most interesting thing in this thing is what she says next, because she's just said it's going to pass. And someday I'm going to look back and say I was silly. And then she goes,
No, I don't want that time to come ever. I want to remember every minute. Always to the end of my days.
It's a very self-aware moment in a film from the 1940s, man. When you talk about this idea of mental health being a recent thing and psychotherapy in the 70s and 80s where psychiatry became a big deal, this is a 1945 film, where a woman is having this very self-aware dialogue about what she's experiencing emotionally. And it's very poignant when she says, I don't want the feeling to go away. You know, it's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to have the memory without the pain.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I don't ever want it to be something I laugh about or whatever, but I never want to forget the power of that love that I had, even though I may not ever have it again. I don't want to forget the power. I just want to remove the pain, you know?
well, and this is not even in the 1940s and any time. This is a female-led movie. It's not just a female-led movie. It is her movie.
It is her story. Absolutely.
100%. And she is a middle-class, unimportant wife.
Yep.
There's not like it is just going. And what the movie does is goes, no, this woman's life is important.
Right.
You know, her feelings are as big and romantic and profound as Gone with the Wind, as any big romantic movie you want to name. Yeah. And yet it's all happening in this very, very small way. One other thing I want to point out is as this whole inner monologue is happening, the camera is pushing in and the light around her is fading out. So you just see her face.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are several Citizen Kane influences on this film.
Yeah,
that
you
are
can
really
sense that,
clear.
right? Yeah, you can sense that, can't you? Yeah.
I think Lean saw that and went, oh, okay.
I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that.
Yeah. They get off the train and she says, no, I'm fine. I'm going to walk home. And she gets to the house and you could see the hat in the foreground. So you know there's a husband and you see her try to sneak up the stairs. Like, I don't want to deal with him. Right. And then there's the husband and there's something going on with the kids. And from this deep, heavy, emotional place, she has to put on the face.
Yeah.
And man, as a parent now, that's one of the big reasons is now I've been married a long time and I'm a parent. And the number of times I've had to put on the face in one way or another and put my crap aside to deal with whatever you have to deal with, man.
Yeah.
And again, what they're dealing with, just life stuff. It's birthdays, and what are we going to do? And we meet her husband, Fred, who's played by Cyril Raymond. I think his character is amazing in this movie.
Yeah.
And he just seems like a really nice guy. And they talk about parent stuff and spoiling the kids. And there's some choice between what they do what one kid wants or what the other kid wants. And finally, he says, which I love,
"We'll thrash them both soundly, lock them up in the attic, and go to the pictures by ourselves."
which is a great husband thing to say.
Yeah.
And what does she do? She bursts into tears.
Yeah. And he is completely sympathetic.
Oh,
like
yeah.
he's just like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Like, what did I say?" Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's really fascinating. God damn, I'm starting to enjoy the film now. It's really fascinating as we talk about it, and I was hoping, like, once again, I was hoping this would happen. Because it's good to have. I had my own internal dialogue about the movie last night, but I can talk to Steve about it, so I don't have to have that kind of thing. And as you know, this moment is really fascinating too, because she is carrying so much weight into the moment. And Cyril, the character that Cyril plays, is Fred. So Fred is not necessarily he's not a bad guy, but you do sense from Fred that Fred is very much operating within the constructs of male-female dynamics in that time in Britain, right? And also, Steve, you mentioned this is a 1945 film. What was happening in World War II? Women were working. Yep. Women were doing that. Women were coming to the forefront of this power. And so the dynamics were changing. So this film becomes popular because maybe women are hearing themselves for the first time on screen, having actual feelings and experiences that they've experienced themselves. How many women have had a mini tryst or a mini moment, or men? Well, I guess less men because it's a patriarchal society. Men have done it with more abandon, but women at the time, I imagine, it was way more difficult to do. So much more was involved here, and the judgment and the shame of it was more powerful because society was not as understanding about it in reverse. So I think that's an important thing that is happening here in this film as well.
Well, and even if you haven't had that tryst, you've thought about it.
Good point.
Because part of what this movie is the contrast between the romantic fantasy and real life.
Yeah.
And in the end, it says the romantic fantasy isn't possible. But it doesn't say that you shouldn't have it, or it's not real, or if it's not profound. Yeah. And then she kind of explains why she's crying by giving him the least possible details, which is, oh, I had, a fainting spell, and this woman was trying to be nice to me, and I just wanted to strangle her. And then she says, and this goes to something you said a little while ago, she says, she just meant to be kind. Isn't it awful about people meaning to be kind?
It's true. It's true.
It's
right, Steve, I'm sure you experienced this, right? Some of the worst interactions you can have after a terrible event are people who are just trying to be kind.
Yep.
And that's not that they shouldn't try to be kind. Lord God, we
of course
need kindness in those moments, but sometimes it's difficult to receive it, and it almost becomes irritating as opposed to soothing, Yeah.
Well, what's so... I'm trying to think of how to say this. We go through rituals, and we use rituals to deal with things.
Yeah.
And the reason we use rituals to deal with things is that there is rarely a way to deal with them in any other way. And so if you're dealing with a tragedy or a death or a reversal, or you got fired, or some crappy thing happened.
Yeah.
People will come and they'll say the things that people say at those events.
Yeah.
And they'll say them because they're trying to be kind. And if you're a polite person, you take them as thank you for your kindness. And yet they don't usually penetrate. They don't help. When someone comes and says, I'm sorry for your loss, or, oh, dude, that sucks.
Right.
Unless they can find a way to actually connect with you, to connect with the feeling, it doesn't really help. And that's that, isn't it awful about people meaning to be kind? That is such a truth that's just kind of thrown off in here.
Yeah.
And he says, well, you should relax. Why don't you want to go to bed? She says, no, I can't. I couldn't sleep. And he says, well, then help me with the Times crossword. And she says, you have peculiar ideas about relaxation. But again, he's doing a move that I've done many times, which is, this is the look over here.
Right.
Let me distract you with some other thing.
Yep.
And he sits at her feet, and we're in an over the shoulder. A lot of this movie is from behind her, where she's sitting in this chair and we're looking at the husband. Yeah. And he asks for help with this crossword puzzle, and the answer to the question is romance. Which she comes up with.
Right. Romance.
And she asks if music would throw him off his stride, and he says, no problem. She goes and puts on the radio, and what is the music she finds? Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto.
What's the history of Rachmaninoff's Second? What is it? What is the main emotion of that piece?
I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Okay.
I do know that he had become a very popular pianist. He played as well. So in addition to composing, he played, and this was his most popular piece to play. He didn't even like playing it that much at a certain time, and that this movie completely revitalized this piece of music. Like, it had sort of fallen on a little bit of disrepute by the 30s and 40s. But not only did it, this is crazy to me, I didn't find it, but not only did it become a big hit again, but someone put lyrics to it and made it a popular song.
What? Really?
Which I listened to this piece of music, I'm like, how would you do this?
Okay.
By the way, Noel Coward wrote full biographies of every one of his characters in his movies. So he wrote their backstories, their hobbies, how they dressed, how they spoke, where they went to school. And one of the things that he wrote is that, and he told David Lean, the music has to be Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. It has to be. Wow. Or it was like a deal breaker for him of making this movie.
How interesting. Okay.
And
this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
And she's lost in thought, and she looks at her husband, and then she looks down, and then we do the same thing. The camera's going to push in on her. The light is going to fade out around her, just revealing her face, and she says,
Fred, dear Fred, there's so much that I want to say to you. You're the only one in the world with enough wisdom and gentleness to understand. If only it were somebody else's story and not mine. As it is, you're the only one in the world that I can never tell.
There's a lot about this. And again, Karen and I have had this. I mean, I'm not saying we've had the affair. Right. I mean, I'm not sure about Karen, but I'm not saying that. But I've definitely had moments, and I know she has too, where there was a thing going on, and the main person I wanted to talk about it was my wife, because that's who I talk about stuff with.
Right. She's if you have a good, strong relationship, your partner becomes your best friend. And, it's great. Yeah.
But there was something I couldn't talk to her about.
Yeah, of course.
Because that wasn't possible.
There's a great line in a Prince song. It's called If I Was Your Girlfriend is the name of the song. He says, he says something like, would you let me talk to you even if it was about somebody else that wasn't you? And I was just like, wow, that's the ultimate in love, or the ultimate in friendship and connection that you can say. And some couples have this, where they can say, I was really turned on by that woman or man. And what was I working through, honey? And that's a very advanced, emotionally advanced couple. So, yeah.
I mean, Karen and I will talk about, man, that person's really hot, or even talk about people we're attracted to. We'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. But that's not what this is. This is, I fell in love in a way I don't love you. But she also says that Fred's the only person with wisdom enough and gentleness enough to understand.
Yeah.
Like, Fred's a good guy.
Yeah, seems like Fred. And that's what I like about the movie too, Steve, is they don't cop out by making Fred a villainous person. So she's doomed to a loveless marriage. It's that he may be a bit distant, not aloof maybe, or doesn't fulfill all her needs. But he's not a bad guy.
Fred, you know what Fred is? Fred's Fred. He's
Fred.
He's Fred. He's funny. He's nice. He's attentive. He is what he is. He's comfortable in who he is.
Right.
And that's it.
Look, fuck Grandpa Joe. Fred is Fred.
Fred is Fred.
Just Fred.
And she says, I love this too. Even if I waited till we were old and told you then, you'd be bound to look back over the years and be hurt. And I don't want you to be hurt.
Yeah. So she does love him too. Like
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a line with a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
If I say I had this, even when we're 60, then you go like, well, wait, you rethink everything if you find that piece of information out.
We're a happily married couple and must never forget that. This is my home. You're my husband. And my children are upstairs in bed. I'm a happily married woman. Or rather, I was until a few weeks ago.
And then she says, Fred, I've been so foolish. I've fallen in love. I'm an ordinary woman, and I didn't think such violent things could happen.
Violent. Imagine the description of love as violent.
It's funny you say that. I would imagine you describing love that way sometimes.
Violent?
No,
because violent implies a physical altercation in my mind.
Right. I understand.
So I don't see love that way. That's why it struck me, that line, the idea that it's violent, but maybe it's violent because it's threatening to destroy her marriage. So it's like a hammer or some device, some wrecking ball into the marriage so that love can be violent. Yeah.
Well, and that changes who she is fundamentally.
Sure.
And two things about this. Again, this is all voiceover. This is all looking at her face. And this is very difficult acting. And one of the things you have to do is you have to get the timing right. And maybe this is why Noel Coward was sending in his 30 seconds, 24 seconds things.
Right.
Because you've got to know how long is the push in. Because Celia Johnson has to know what she's thinking at that moment.
Right.
Because her facial expression, and watch it throughout the film, her facial expression will change as the new thought comes along. And her face performance, in addition to her voice performance, is just really great.
Yeah.
And now we're going to do it's a full Citizen Kane. And I don't know if David Lean saw this and knew he was copying Citizen Kane or he came up with this on his own. But we're in this over the shoulder looking at the room as she's describing where her affair began.
Yeah.
And she remains there and all the other light fades out. And then the new location fades in and then she fades away, which is exactly Jed Leland looking at the breakfast table.
Yeah.
And the way you do this, by the way, is that you normally do a dissolve. This time you would do it chemically, but you do it by fading out one image and fading in another. Yeah. But in this case, you want part of the room to fade out first and the other part to fade out second. So you lower the light on the one side of the room, and so that you have it go really dark in one side of the room and keep the other part lit. And then in the other shot that you're fading into, you have it start dark and go really light.
Yeah.
And you keep the other part dark. And so when they superimpose, those fades happen within the same shot. Mm-hmm. It just takes some planning.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to say, way back in one of our earliest episodes, I learned something really interesting from Quentin Tarantino, which is the difference between flashbacks and nonlinear structure. Quentin Tarantino in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction is doing nonlinear structure. Right. Because there's no person remembering what happened. Right. That is a flashback.
Right. And that's what she's doing is a flashback.
This is flashbacks.
Yeah.
And
is Rashomon flashbacks? That's all flashbacks, right?
No, because it is. Yeah, of course.
Rashomon is.
Yeah, because it's people remembering.
Yeah.
And we're back in that refreshment room, and she's reading a book and having some tea, and she happens to see a man and didn't quite see his face, and then she saw his face and it was a nice face, and we have Myrtle and Albert. They're talking about cats, and we don't really. Again, I'm not going to tell you all the stuff they talk about. It's perfectly fun. And she gets up, she goes out, and that express train goes by. Again, the express train is about passion, And she gets something in her eye, and she goes back inside, asks for a glass of water. All this was in the play, and. Trevor Howard comes up. By the way, originally someone else was cast. I don't know who, and they fired him.
Okay.
And he had never starred in a movie. He had played a couple of little parts. Apparently, he had a very big personality on the set. Apparently, he's younger than Celia Johnson, much less experienced, a big drinker.
Oof.
Almost like, I can't tell you, like every interview about him said, well, he drank a lot. So clearly, if everybody says this, the guy drank.
Well, it seems like, and this is the time where like a lot of these British, I mean, that's a tradition, the British acting.
Oh, yeah.
British male actor drinking tradition. Yeah.
And he really trusted David Lean. That's
Good.
kind of the big thing. He said he really went, you tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And I love the suggestions of how to get something out of your eye.
Try pulling your eyelid down as far as it'll go.
And then blowing your nose.
Like, really? But Alec, the Trevor Howard character, is a doctor, and he comes up very gently and says, let me look, and takes his handkerchief and gets the little thing out. And she says, oh, what a relief. It was agonizing. And she thanks him. And then he says, there's my train. I got to go.
Yeah.
And that's it. She sits down.
Yeah.
And again, I am certain you've had this because everyone has, where you have 3 minutes with a person and you go, that was interesting.
Right.
She was some. And maybe you looked out the window or watched to see which direction they went or,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
Sure.
And of course, nothing's going to come of it. You're never going to see that person again.
Right.
It's just a moment, you know.
I don't have those anymore. But I used to have them a lot in my 30s, 20s, 30s, and early 40s. Like, yeah.
Well, we're trapped inside and quarantined at home. I don't know how you would have them.
I would say this. No, since I've met my girlfriend and been with my girl, I just don't have those moments anymore. It's weird. Like my energy is different. I don't convey that energy to have that kind of moment anymore. So it's weird. I don't know. I'm just saying. I haven't had them in a couple of years.
I also notice since I've gotten older and my testosterone has gone down, I'm not kidding. There are certain parts of me, I don't have them as much anymore either. I think it's because my brain's not in that place.
I'm not going to say it's my testosterone issue.
Well, you've always had a lot more testosterone than me. I mean, the outlaw.
Come on. Well, the outlaw has, yes.
The outlaw has a lot.
Yeah.
I completely forgot the whole incident. It didn't mean anything to me at all. At least I didn't think it did.
By the way, this is also an interesting concept too in the movie, Steve. Just like Citizen, because I mean, one of the things that hit me when I was talking about Citizen Kane a few months ago was like, oh, wait, we never hear him speak for himself. So the entire movie is told through everyone else's point of view but his. So we have no idea if everything they've told us about him is actually true. We never get a full concept of who Charles Foster Kane is. And of course, that's what the reporter says at the end, to kind of wrap it up. But like here in this moment, this is all through her mind. So we don't know what Trevor Howard was doing. We don't know if like it really was like her being all like, and him, which we see a little bit later. He was a little more of the aggressor of the two. We don't know because it's all through her point of view. This is her story.
I had a thought, which I'd never had before, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes, about this, that's exactly to that point. And, we see her do her errands and she goes to the library and she buys some stuff. And by
the way, I should say, sorry, Steve. Well, sorry to cut you off again. This is something British women did back in the 30s as well, the late 30s. This was something that was done. They had one day of shopping and they would go out of town on a train to a town to do shopping. It's such an unusual thing, but this is what.
Well, and that's what's interesting about the movie. I can't think of a movie up to this point that is so domestic.
Yeah.
There's just so much. This is the things that people do.
Yeah.
Movies are usually about bigger stuff than going to do shoppings and buying birthday presents and things like that. And then they run into her and they have a completely small talky thing. Mm-hmm. But if you look at her face, she is smiling in a way that we have never seen.
Yeah.
And then she goes back to the station and she gets to the train and then she thinks of him. Mm-hmm. And just having the thought, and again, I've had this thought, oh, this is where I saw that person before. I wonder if I'll see them. We hear this little bit about a birthday present for Fred and it's very expensive and should I buy it? And then we cut to the next Thursday. We're now in the third week. Mm-hmm. And we're in the second week. Mm-hmm. And she is buying this extravagant birthday present for Fred. And then she heads to a place for lunch, and it's crowded, and she manages to find a table, and in walks Alec, and there's nowhere else to sit, and he asks if he can join her, which he does, introduces himself. Again, it's small talk about him being a doctor, and it's instant connection.
Yeah.
And the joy on their faces to just talk to this person, and the naturalness and lack of awkwardness is apparent.
Yeah.
And then there's a little joke where they look up and there's like a trio playing of women and they see the cellist and they think she's funny. I don't know why they think she's so funny.
Well,
but
she's
they
unusual looking.
Well,
yeah.
Well, and again, this is something that we've all done of when you were in that romantic moment of looking out at the world and commenting on it and sharing a private joke. And for them, the private joke is the cellist.
Yeah.
Again, it's light conversation. We talk a little bit about the hospital. He asks if she comes every Thursday. She says yes. And then she always goes to the pictures. And he says, oh, so am I.
I thought you had to spend all day at the hospital.
Well, between ourselves, I killed 2 patients by accident this morning. The matron is very displeased with me. I simply daren't go back.
Dr. Humor.
It's a little Dr. Humor. And he says, would you mind very much if I came to the pictures with you?
Right.
This is
He's the aggressor.
Well, and this is the first time I ever had this thought. And I think this is not what the movie is, and it's wrong. Right. But I went, man, you could do this where he is playing her. And this is a thing that he does to married women all the time.
Could be.
That he takes advantage of people that he sees are a little bit lonely and flirts with them in order to seduce them and then does it again. Now, that's not this movie. I think you have to accept in watching this film that this is true love.
Right.
If you don't, the movie's going to not work.
Yeah, it's kind of a darker movie.
And they finally go like, yeah, okay, let's go to the movie. And I love, by the way, that they finished lunch and they got a bill that didn't get split into 2 people. And he says that he wants to pay, and she argues, and then she says in voiceover, we halved it meticulously, and you see 2 coins go down, and then even to the tip, and you see 2 more coins go down, and it's cute.
Yes.
And they give the movie choices, and they head to the movie, and they're sitting in the balcony, and it's a ridiculous trailer for something called Flames of Passion that's coming. Which I love that after the Flames of Passion trailer is a ad for Baby Stroller.
Yeah.
Because passion leads to Baby Stroller.
Right. But also it's a nice 2 trailers, right? Because the Flames of Passion are what we're going to get from them.
Exactly.
The Baby Stroller is what they both would have to sacrifice to stay in the Flames of Passion.
Yeah. And she says they ends up that they're in the balcony, which is more expensive. And she says,
I feel awfully grand perched up here. It was very extravagant of you.
It's a famous victory.
Do you feel guilty at all? I do.
Guilt is obviously going to play a really important part in this relationship.
A little relaxation never did harm to anyone. Why should either of us feel guilty?
I don't know.
How awfully nice you are.
And then rising up from below the theater comes the organist. And it's the cellist, and they crack up. We head back to the station, and she says, just as we reached the gate, he put his hand under my arm. I didn't notice it then, but I remember it now. And then they ask about each other's spouses. His wife is small, dark, and rather delicate. She describes her husband as medium height, brown hair, unemotional, and not delicate at all.
You said that proudly.
Did I?
It's funny. There's so many ways that I felt watching this. I'm like, oh, I'm Fred.
You think you're Fred? All right.
I have some very Fred-like qualities.
Okay.
You can ask Karen. There's a lot of stuff that Fred does. And the description of, unemotional and not delicate at all, that's pretty me too.
Okay.
And they go into the refreshment area and they're having, again, it's small talk about him being a doctor, but the connection between them is really strong. She gets him to talk about the doctor stuff, his passion.
You suddenly look much younger.
Do I?
Almost like a little boy.
Wow.
So his wife, small, dark, rather delicate, doesn't want him to talk about work.
Right.
He never gets to. And she's willing to let him talk about the thing he's passionate about and connects to him on that passion, even though she doesn't understand what the hell he's talking about, which is all this stuff, by the way, about preventative medicine, which is like really seen in the future, as something that becomes really important. And there's a thing that I find very hard to express, and I'm going to try to say it. The voiceover that's throughout the film is telling you exactly how she feels. This is what I'm thinking at this moment. This scene, there's no voiceover. They're not speaking romantically at all. This is that the words are not what's happening. What's happening is what's underneath the words. So on the one hand, you have the clearest possible explanation of emotions through the voiceover. And on the other hand, you have these scenes that are filled with emotions, but done in much more in the traditional way. And of course, as they're talking, what do we start to hear but the music?
What made you say that?
I don't know. Yes, I do.
Tell me.
No, I couldn't really. You were saying about the coal mines.
Every time it's romantic, we get Rachmaninoff. And as it builds in intensity, suddenly there's the bell. Time's up.
There's your train.
Yes.
You mustn't miss it.
No.
And then he says, shall I see you again?
She says, like, no big deal. Of course. You know.
No. That's not what happens.
Oh.
No, she says, you're going to miss your train. And then he asks again. You're right. Because he asks again, and he says, can I see you again? She says, yes, of course. But she's saying, why don't you get Madeline and your kids? You'll come out with the families and we'll hang out together.
Yes.
Which is a perfect deflection. And he says,
Please.
What is it?
Next Thursday, the same time.
Then she gets it. Then she gets it that he's putting it on the table.
I think she got it before.
Well, fair. But he puts it on the table so that she can't deflect it anymore. She has to actually address it.
No, I couldn't possibly.
Please. I ask you most humbly.
She says no, and he says, all right, and it's goodbye, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And she reaches out to shake her hands, and then I think that just flies out of her mouth without her volition.
I'll be there.
Thank you, my dear.
I don't think she planned on saying that. I think everything in her brain said, this is it. This is done. And then she just had to say it.
Does she say it when they grab hands?
Yeah.
So maybe that's the electricity. Yeah.
And the music hits, and her face goes from the joy of connection, and then he walks out the door, and then you watch the realization hit her of what she's done.
Right.
Because running into this guy and having lunch with him, okay. Going to the movie with him, is a little bit towards the line, but it's okay. When he says, can I see you again? Not with the families. And she says, I'll be there. She has crossed the line.
I imagined him getting out of Shirley, letting himself into his house with his latchkey. His wife would probably be in the hall to meet him, small, dark, and rather delicate. I wondered if he'd say, I met such a nice woman at the Cardoma. We had lunch and went to the pictures. And then suddenly I knew that he wouldn't. I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that he wouldn't say a word. And at that moment, the first awful feeling of danger swept over me.
Wow.
And when we hear that, we have the steam of the train hit, the scream, the screech of the train hits at that moment. And again, watch her face. Watch her face as these lines go by. Her performance is lockstep with what her voiceover is saying.
Yeah.
And she gets in, and again, I've had this feeling too. She gets in the train compartment with a lot of people, and she's like, can everyone see this on my face? Yeah. There's a weird thing. I'm sure you've had this too. There's a weird thing of going through intense emotions in a very public place.
Oh, yeah.
When nobody knows what the hell was going on with you.
Yeah.
And it feels very isolating and very cut off from the world. By the time she gets home, it's all silly. It's all dumb. I'm not going to do it. We're just let it go. And she goes into her house, and what has happened? But her kid has been hit by a car. I am telling you, there are circumstances many times where I've been going through a thing that was really, really important.
Yeah.
And I was determined to with Karen, or in some way, deal with whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And then my kid had a thing. And then I couldn't. And the only right thing to do, I'll give you an example. Karen and I do some couples therapy, and we had a couples therapy thing, and I had a thing. And I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about this really important thing. Right. And then our kid had an incident at camp. Right. Where we had to pick him up. They kicked him out of camp. And I had nowhere else to go. I had to bring him to the therapy appointment. And so the therapy appointment became about the thing that happened at camp. Right. And that was the right thing to do. It was the right thing as a parent. It was the right thing for him. And my thing got stuck down. Right. And that's what's happening to her right now.
Yes. But also I think once again, the film does not comment on it, but these things that happen around it imply that it's doomed to fail. The idea that the fact that your child was hit by a car on the day that this moment happens where you agree to essentially walk down the path or take a step towards the path of cheating on your husband. your son gets hit by a car, right? These are the little mini signs that I think the film does to kind of let you know in a subconscious way that this is going to end in a tragic way. And I don't mean death or anything, but just tragic.
Well, and that's how she feels. She feels, like guilty, and thinks she knows they're not connected, but thinks they are connected. Yeah. And by the way, just for those of you who haven't seen it, the kid's fine. He's going to be fine. And it's later on, they're at the fire and talking about things, and they're just joking about kids' futures. And I'm not going to tell you all the stuff they're talking about, but it's cute and it's funny. And then there's this moment where she just decides to tell him.
I had lunch with a strange man today, and he took me to the movies.
And Fred says,
"Good for you."
She says he's a doctor, and Fred says, "A very noble profession." And her performance is so layered because you see her put on the face of, I'm just telling you about a casual thing, it's no big deal. And you see underneath the stress of, why am I doing this? I shouldn't do this. I have to do this. How is he going to react? And then he reacts in the strangest way.
Yeah.
And I love this.
I thought perhaps we might ask him to dinner one night.
By all means.
Who?
Yeah. Right. Which means he hasn't been listening at all. He's just been placating her while he plays the crossword puzzle.
He has been half or quarter listening.
Sure.
He's heard the words enough to respond to them.
Right.
Must it be dinner?
Well, you're never at home for lunch.
Exactly.
Again, this is a moment where I'm Fred. And what does she do? She cracks up.
Oh, Fred.
This is a scene where we have dialogue going on that has two entirely different meanings. Because she says, I'm an absolute idiot worrying about things that don't exist.
Right.
And what she's talking about is this potential affair. It's nothing. It's all she did was have lunch with this guy. Nothing has happened. Right. But what he is hearing is that she was worrying about her son getting hit by the car. Mm-hmm. And so they're having parallel conversations that have total double meanings. And then it's the next Thursday, and she has a plan. She's just going to show up out of politeness and say, hey, we can't do this. And he doesn't show.
Right. He doesn't show.
And she sees the same cellist at the lunch place, but it's not funny. She walks by the hospital. Nope. Went to see a movie. Didn't like it. Then she ends up back at the train station. Again, the conductor and Myrtle and Albert are having their thing, which... By the way, this might be my favorite British line of all time of this particular culture.
Now look at me Banbury's all over the floor.
It's just so like of a particular era. And then what do we hear? A bell. And we know that she's thinking about him, and she walks out and she's like, oh, he didn't come. Right. Like, I was going to let him down, but in fact, he backed out. And maybe that's a good thing, Like, oh, it's over. I don't have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah.
And then on the platform, there he is. Running up, and the music hits, and they are far away, and we cannot hear what they're talking about. Then he gets in his train.
I'm so glad I had a chance to explain. I didn't think I'd see you again.
I'm so happy. Quickly.
Which I love. Because he didn't explain to us.
Right.
But we know he explained to her, and the joy on her face, and he says,
Next Thursday.
Yes, next Thursday.
Goodbye. Thursday. Goodbye.
All the resolve, all the decision of like, this was silly, this was dumb, it's not important. Oh, he didn't come. Good. That's good. He didn't come. And instantly, next Thursday. Yes, next Thursday.
Yep. And
then the smile on her face just drops.
Yeah.
And now it's the next Thursday, and they're laughing to Donald Duck in the movie theater. By the way, both of these lines are great, and so I'm going to read them, although I'll probably cut to them saying them.
The stars can change in their courses, the universe go up in flames, and the world crash around us, but there'll always be Donald Duck.
Oh, I do love him so. His dreadful energy and his blind, frustrated raging.
Those are wonderfully British good descriptions of Donald Duck.
It's the big picture now. Here we go. No more laughter. Prepare for tears.
It's right about this movie. And the movie was bad, so they leave and they end up at the Botanical Gardens. And then he decides they wants to get a boat. And it's not boat season, but they manage to get a boat, and they're out rowing the boat. And I love this too, as they're rowing the boat, who is she talking to? Because who is this whole voiceover monologue to?
Oh, we had such fun, Fred. I felt gay and happy and sort of released. That's what's so shameful about it all. That's what would hurt you so much if you knew. That I could feel as intensely as that, away from you, with a stranger.
Happy and sort of released. I know exactly what that feeling is. You know, and it doesn't matter what you're released from. Maybe it's you didn't have to go into work that day, or you didn't. There was a time I'd been dealing with a lot of family stuff. You know, relatives were in town and there was lots of family events. And then I had to go shopping. And I got in my car to go run a couple of errands. And I was alone. And I felt gay and happy and sort of released. I just like, yes. I'm just I get to listen to my audiobook and I'm podcasts and I'm a driver and we go to the grocery store. And I was so happy to just not have to deal with people for an hour. And then they crash into the chain because he's not a very good rower.
Right.
And he goes, okay, I'm going to put, it's so dumb what he does. He's holding onto this thing and pushing the boat away. And then he's just hovering over the water and ends up in the water.
Yeah.
And they laugh. And we end up at like the boatman's house and they're having tea and it's all very quiet. And there's looks. And then he says,
You know what's happened, don't you?
And she says,
Yes. Yes, I do.
And he says it. I've fallen in love with you.
And she says, yes, I know. It's not a happy moment.
No, of course not, because of the implication, you know. And once again, the movie theater foreshadows what's coming. The joy is the Daffy Duck, Donald Duck. The joy is that it's almost childlike, right? The infancy of a relationship is childlike, and the joy and the wonder, and you're in that honeymoon phase. But then he says it as a kind of a prescient thing. And he says, now come the tears, big picture. Now come the tears. Big picture, meaning everything that's involved in this relationship and everything that will fall apart if we continue in this relationship. And so when they're having that moment it just harkens back to the movie theater.
Well, and I think that's 100% correct. And I think also that the reason it's not a happy moment is because they love their spouses.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Is that if they, and this is why there's no bad people in this movie, is that it's not that they have people they hate. First of all, it's not that their spouses are bad people. And second of all, it's not that they're bad people.
Right.
They're all good people. Yeah. And so the knowledge of I've fallen in love with you is hand in hand with, I'm going to cause pain somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's going to be pain.
Please tell me honestly if what I believe is true.
What do you believe?
That it's the same with you.
Sounds so silly.
Why?
I know you so little.
It is true, though, isn't it?
Yes, it's true.
And she is fighting it.
We must be sensible. Please help me to be sensible. We mustn't behave like this. We must forget that we've said what we've said.
And he says, not yet. What I think is interesting with, and again, he is definitely more aggressive through the whole thing.
Right, through her point of view. Yeah.
He knows it's doomed just as much as she does.
Yeah.
But he wants to hold on to the moment. Let's just hold on to it.
But he seems less emotionally affected by the loss of it than she does. But then again,
we're not in his head.
Right. But he's also proper British, right? Yeah. So he's not going to show that emotion or start bawling or start feeling like desperate. It's even when she said initially, like, to meet the next Thursday, and she finally says no, and he gets it, he just says, all right. There's not a kind of like, please, you don't understand. But then when, you know, like this situation, he's like saying to her, like, not yet. Like, let's enjoy this a little bit more. We'll hit that line. So he's very aware of what's going to happen. So I think your point you could absolutely rewatch this film and see Terrence Howard's character as a little bit selfish through the movie because he's the aggressor. He doesn't let it go. He's the one that takes her to the movies. He's the one that says, not yet. He's the one that didn't show up until the last possible moment in the meeting when they were supposed to go after he said to her, like, you know, please meet me next Thursday. He shows up right at the last minute before they jump on a train. So in that way, was he meeting another woman at that time? Another one that he's got something with? I don't know. But you can absolutely look at this in a whole nother light if you were to watch this movie and kind of try to create a different backstory for him.
I think so. It's so interesting because, like, the thing I say about that is that you totally can, but you shouldn't. because the movie works the way it works, and it works as a true love movie.
Steve getting precious about a film. Oh shit! Okay.
Well, no, of course you can interpret it however you want, but what's so interesting is like it's it's like the chef tells you should eat this food in this order. And you go, screw you, chef. I'm going to eat it in whatever order I want.
You know what? I'm watching the prequels, then the original trilogy.
Yeah, I don't care. And one of the things that they do to show that this is true love is that he tells her thoughts.
Yeah.
How often did you decide that you were never going to see me again?
Several times a day.
So did I. I love you.
He's telling her, look, I'm right with you. I've had all the same regrets, all the same guilt, all the same thoughts, all the same stuff that you're having. I'm being more aggressive about pursuing what I'm pursuing.
Right.
And then, man, the romance of...
I love your wide eyes, the way you smile, and your shyness, and the way you laugh at my jokes.
Please don't.
I love you. It's no use pretending it hasn't happened, because it has.
Yes, it has. I don't want to pretend anything either to you or to anyone else. But from now on, I shall have to. That's what's wrong, don't you see? That's what spoils everything. That's why we must stop here and now talking like this. We're neither of us free to love each other. There's too much in the way.
And then she cries.
Yeah.
Because it's the effort not to hurt Fred and the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And he puts his hand on her head as she kind of bends over, and he says, "There's no time at all. Train bell." And we're back at the train, and at the train station, and they're in sort of the tunnel. He leans in for a kiss, and she says no, and he says, "I love you so," and then they do kiss. And then we're back with Fred and the music.
Hi, Laura.
And that Rachmaninoff has gotten loud.
Yeah.
Painfully loud in terms of the mix. And it's both because the radio is playing too loud in the house, but it's also because the danger of what's happening. Mm-hmm. Their romance is represented by the music, and now it's too loud. And so Fred asks to turn it down, and she says, "Sure, no problem." And she doesn't say, "Sure, no problem." She says some wonderful British way of saying that. And then he says, "You look tired." And she says, "Don't worry, I'm perfectly happy."
If only it were true. Not, I suppose, that anybody's ever perfectly happy, really.
And then what I liked that she says, and this is a very mature thought.
But just to be ordinarily contented. To be at peace.
That's not perfectly happy.
Right.
You know, that is the staid, consistent, contented life that she had with Fred before she met Alec.
Right.
Not perfectly happy, not filled with wild throes of romance, but contented.
Yeah.
And she says, "It was only a while ago, but it seems an eternity since the train went out of the station. I was happy there."
That's the Adam and Eve situation of it, isn't it? Like, I didn't know I wasn't happy until you showed me how happy I could be. That's the thing, right? It's an Adam and Eve moment. I didn't know I was naked until I bit the apple. Yep. And I think a lot of people have that experience, like, oh my, because it takes another person kind of because you're so close to the situation, you can't see it. So it takes another person kind of walking into your life. And like you said, Steve, maybe having that fantasy or pursuing it that wakes you up to the fact that you were unhappy in the situation. And sometimes, and I've heard this from people, like sometimes the mini affair, as long as it's never found out, lets the
recharges the relationship,
and helps you reappreciate the partner you were with, right? And of course, other times it leads to terrible things. But like, there are the moments where this kind of stuff happens on both sides, men and women, where there's that mini affair, and it kind of wakes you up and go, yeah. Like someone wise once said, "Your partner's never going to be the A to Z."
Literally was about to say the So clearly we're on the same page in this.
There we go.
I know it's come up before. The A to Z theory is that you're not going to get everything for your partner. You might get A to T, but there's going to be some things that are missing, and there are going to be some irritating things your partner does that really bug you, and that's life. This movie is a perfect example.
Yes, it is.
I think Fred's a great guy. I think she gets lots of great things from Fred. And the thing about the A to Z theory is, let's say you're missing W.
Right.
You know, that's someone who wants to watch movies with you, or someone who likes to go dancing, or someone who loves, you know, horror novels or whatever.
Right.
And then you meet someone who's all about the W.
Yeah.
And then you have the feeling of being gay and happy and sort of released, you know, everything is right with this person. And of course, because I am not a believer in true love and perfect romance, that if Alec and Laura did get together, eventually things would not be so romantic.
Yeah, right.
You know, that they're going to find the parts of each other that they don't like at some point.
Right.
They're just not having them now. But right now, she is walking on air. She goes into the train. She doesn't even pretend to read. And then as the camera pushes in on her face, we have just the full fantasy. And we have, again, this is very technical, is superimposed on her face. And through the window, we see all the romantic, and it is just classic schoolgirl romantic fantasies.
Yeah.
Which is what she calls them. And we see them in Paris and in Venice and on a cruise and on the beach, and everything is wonderful romantic. And then we go from the tropical beach and into the real world, and she says,
Then the palm trees changed into those pollarded willows by the canal just before the level crossing. And all the silly dreams disappeared. And I got out at Ketchworth and walked home as usual, quite soberly and without wings. Without any wings at all.
And we're back at the house, and I love too, because she's still talking to Fred in her mind.
You see, you didn't know that was the first time in our life together that I'd ever lied to you. It started then. The shame of the whole thing.
And in comes a smiling Fred and asks about lunch and the pictures, and did you go by yourself? And she said, oh, yes, no, not exactly. And again, it's great acting, because lying is always an interesting thing to do on film, because you have to decide how good a liar are you and how much do you want to let the audience in. And what she does is, it is a genuinely good lie.
Yeah.
And we can see the stuff underneath while she does this lie. Right. And the lie is that she met this friend and they ran into each other and had lunch and, you know, had a nice time, and she went to the movie. She didn't go to the movie. And then he leaves her. And you see her face just fall as he walks out. Yeah. And she grabs the phone, dials the phone, makes a call to the woman that she just lied about.
Yep.
And says, oh, I made the most appalling domestic lie. And she says that she was really going to buy the present for Fred, which we saw her buy. And can you just say that we had lunch together? And she goes, oh, sure, of course. And
then she says, I'll do the same for you down the road sometime.
Yeah. And then she says, hey, let's get together. How about next Thursday? Oh, I can't Thursday. Friday. And I've had this moment too.
That week was misery. I went through it in a sort of trance. How odd of you not to have noticed that you were living with a stranger in the house.
I've had this, you know, where I was going through a thing and Karen didn't know, I hadn't told her yet, and going like, it's a weird thing, because there's a weird sort of pride in, man, I'm holding all this together. Nobody knows.
Right.
And a weird, like, how can nobody know? How can you not see that what's happening to me at this moment?
Right.
It's Thursday. They meet. He takes her to a very fancy restaurant. They have champagne. They laugh. They go back out into the lobby. He says, oh, I got a surprise for you. He walks away. And who walks out of the fancy restaurant but the woman she just called to lie for her and her friend?
Yeah.
This is horrible.
Laura! So it was you after all. Hermione said it was.
How are
you?
you?
You know how short-sighted I am. I peered and still couldn't be sure.
I never saw you at all. How awful of me. I expect it was the champagne.
And again, this is smart lying. So it's a good thing to put the most incriminating thing out first. And then she says, I never have it at lunch, but Alec insisted. And they go, Alec who? And she comes up with a lie.
Alec Harvey, of course. Surely you remember the Harveys. I've known them for years.
You've met him at the this thing or the that thing. She's like, no, I don't think I remember him. And they say, he looks very charming. And the other woman says, yes, he seems very attentive.
Very attentive.
Yeah. And then up comes Alec. And they go, oh, you remember Mrs. Norton? He's like, I don't know you. No, I don't. And there's
Alec doesn't play along with the lie.
No, he doesn't play. Well, and it's just like, come on, you're not going to, we've never really met. And there's some awkward small talk, and they say, okay, goodbye. And the last thing they say is,
Goodbye, my dear. I do so envy you your champagne.
Because they know. I mean,
right. And this is going to be a scene that juxtaposes later, which we'll get to, when his friend comes back too early.
Exactly.
This idea that both people have friends who understand the feelings and are willing to look the other way or cover up for them. So, yeah.
I shivered, and Alec put his arm around me.
Cold?
No, not really.
Happy?
No, not really.
So even though we're in the midst of romance, this is not a happy day.
No, of course.
And he says, I know exactly what you're going to say. Again, it's the, we are in the same place.
That the furtiveness and lying outweigh the happiness we might have together. Isn't that it?
Something like that.
Here's the thing that I hadn't thought about in the context of this movie until this time.
Okay.
Is that Noel Coward was a gay man.
Yes.
And obviously basically closeted because it was illegal in England at the time. And that line, it's not worth it. The furtiveness and lying outweighs the happiness. Like, there's a way to think of this movie as an affair between two men.
Yeah, sure.
You know, like, and I think that would be an interesting film. It's like someone who's married to, two men. They both have wives.
Yeah.
They're both married. And then they have this affair or almost have this affair.
I think it's called Grace and Frankie. I think it's called Grace and Frankie on Netflix.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, Sheen and Waterston. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I hadn't thought about, and this came up, I think, in one of the commentaries of the film or something, is I didn't think about how close this is. Oscar Wilde, the previous great British witty writer to Noel Coward, he was arrested and imprisoned for sodomy in 1890.
Yeah.
That's around when Noel Coward was born. Noel Coward was writing plays in 1920. Yeah. Like that's you think today's 2020, how far away is 1990?
Right.
It's not that far. Because I always think of Noel Coward and Oscar Wilde, totally different eras. But they're pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
We're back at the train station and he says, I'm going to miss my train. And it's all silhouetted. We don't see his face.
I'm going back. I'm going to miss my train.
Back where?
To Stephen's flat.
Oh, Alec.
Now, this is as clear as can be.
Yeah.
He's saying, come back with me to this flat and we will consummate this affair.
Once again, the aggressor in the whole situation.
100%.
In her eyes, in her point of view. Yeah.
Well, I think there's objectively, like, he's the guy saying, come back to the flat.
Well, I don't know if he said that. That's the thing. It's all through her point of view.
Sure. If this is real.
Right.
And they kiss, and what happens at the moment they kiss? The express train goes by. The express train is about passion and emotion. The bells of the trains to go home are about the real world.
Yeah.
And she says, I got to go home, and runs away.
Yeah.
And inside, we're back in the refreshment place where some soldiers come in and harass Myrtle, and Albert stands up for them.
Jerk-off soldiers, yeah.
Total jerks. And again, I'm not going to spend that much time on it but I do think it's so interesting that you're in this intense emotional moment and life is going on around you and it doesn't know what you're going through. And then Laura hears the announcement of her train and hears her own voice in her head saying, I really must go home. And here's his voice saying, I'm going back to the flat. And it repeats. Again, I've had this, not this exact thing, but things like this in my mind. And she goes and she gets on the train. And just as the train is about to start to move, she stands up and says, I've forgotten something. And she gets out of the moving train. And interestingly enough, this section has no voiceover.
Right. Yeah. Right.
We don't, because we know her thoughts, frankly. She gets to the building, she rings the bell, and he answers, surprised. And she goes in, and they talk about the rain. And she says, I'm so frightened.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, maybe the fire will warm you up, as if it was shivers from the rain and the cold that's making her uncomfortable. And they kiss. And then she says, I can't. I can't. And he says, and again, this is the guy, and this is being the aggressor, just stay a little while.
Yeah.
You remember the scene? I don't know why it reminded me of this moment, but Rocky Balboa and Talia Shire in the love scene where he says, just come up for a little while. Well, just stay a little while. And she's like, I can't.
And some people ding the movie for that, which because of course we're all so hypersensitive nowadays. But some people ding the Rocky movie for that. Oh, he like tricked her upstairs and then he trapped her in the apartment. I'm like, have any of you ever fucking Like, it just frustrates me sometimes. Like, some relationships are born out of that. Some relationships are born out of that moment of like one person wanting to kind of seduce the other person to come upstairs, and the other person being timid and not sure and not shy, and coming up there, and then their walls come down because they've been afraid to care for somebody or afraid to connect with somebody, and someone has to come along who kind of knocks those walls down. And so that does happen. It doesn't mean that every single time it's correct the way to do it, but this is a movie and it's a love story. And so people try to ding a movie like that. It drives me up a fucking wall, man. And so I think this kind of thing is, like you said, Steve, there's a way to look at this movie, and there's a sweetness here and a love here, but there's also an aggressive approach by Terrence Howard to make this happen, you know, and
Trevor
Howard. Sorry, Trevor, not Terrence, right? That's a very different approach. But Trevor Howard, and not necessarily an aggressive approach, but maybe aggressive for that time, you know, and insisting in it because he's in that flat, and he's certainly going to do something in that flat,
of course,
when she shows up. But the thing I wanted to say earlier, and I will
let me just we talked about the Rocky thing. We talked about Rocky. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah,
like there have been other times, you know, obviously Blade Runner's come up a bunch and other things. Is that, and this is the thing, and it's true of this movie, is that Rocky is right, you know, and Talia Shire really does want to be there,
right? That's
what she really wants, right. and he sees it. And will I say to my son, like, hey, kid, this is what you should do. Get her up in your apartment and get in her way when she wants to. No, of course not. I don't think that behavior is correct. But I do think it's correct for them in that moment, in that relationship.
Exactly.
And these characters are in the same place, too.
Yeah, right.
You know, and he would, if she says, I got to go, he'd let her go.
Right, of course.
You know.
Yeah. But by the same token, I also say this. It always takes two to tango, and I never ever buy when people say, when they cheat, like, oh, it just happened. Oh, it came out of the blue, or it just happened. Bullshit. Her walking to that flat, she can choose not to walk to that flat. And I think in every affair, both sides make a decision and a choice. And it's up for other people to forgive, but you can never say, oh, it just surprised me. It was out of the blue. I had no idea. Bull. You always make a decision to cheat, and that's the thing at the end of the day. And it's your decision if you want to feel poorly or understanding about them. And in this situation, you know, the film doesn't judge, as we've said over and over again, so it allows us to feel whatever we would like to feel as we watch this go forward.
Well, what I think is, there's no question when she gets off that train, she knows that sex is a possibility. I mean, she's not a fool.
Sure, absolutely.
When he says, I'm going back, I'm going to miss my train and go back to the flat. And she says no. Well, the reason she says no is because she's saying, no, we can't actually consummate this affair. Right. And when she gets off the train, and everybody has the right to back out at the last possible moment if they go, but she is thinking,
of course.
Her brain is going, I am going to have an affair with him. No, I can't. Yes, I will. No, I won't. That's what's happening with her right now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I believe that if Steven, the guy who owns the flat, doesn't show up in the next minute, I think they do have an affair.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think they do. That's why she came back. That's why. Yeah. And yes, there's going to be some resistance, and yes, they're going to feel guilty, and but I think it's going to happen. Yeah. But it doesn't happen because they hear the door, and he rushes her off the back stairs, and she runs away. And now we're left, and this, in fact, breaks all the rules of the movie because now we're going to have the only scene in the film where she isn't there. Because everything else is here's her flashback, and she was not here for this scene.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how can she even tell us this scene?
It breaks the rules.
Oh, it does break the rules.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I mean, did you bump on it? I bet you didn't.
No.
I never did.
Nope,
I didn't. I mean, I've seen this movie 10, 15 times. I thought about it this time. But I did, you know, because I think the movie totally works. And this scene with this guy, the owner of the flat, is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
The dialogue is dialogue that only Noel Coward could write. It is so British, articulate, urbane dialogue. And it's so rough because he comes in and finds, you know, he says, oh, I had a cold, so I came back early. And then he sees the scarf that she left behind.
Well, now, my dear Alec, you have hidden depths which I never even suspected.
Look here, Steve,
For heaven's sake, Alec, no explanations or apologies. I'm the one who should apologize for returning so inopportunely.
And then he said, and I love this, he comes up with Alec's lie for him.
Yeah.
It's quite obvious to me that you were interviewing a patient privately. Women are frequently rather neurotic creatures, and the hospital atmosphere is upsetting to them.
And what's funny is you're kind of going, oh, is this dude cool with this? Is your first sort of thought. But then the sort of venom inside, it's like, because what he's really saying is, dude, you brought a chick back to my apartment?
Yeah,
like, what the hell? You're going to have sex with some woman in my bed?
That's true.
That is not cool. Right. But he's so British that he expresses it in this totally weird way.
I'm surprised at this farcical streak in your nature, Alec. Such carryings on are quite unnecessary. After all, we've been friends for years, and I am the most broad-minded of men.
And then you cut to Alec, and you realize, like, Alec is embarrassed and humiliated and also kind of irritated at the way this guy's poking at him.
You're perfectly right. Explanations are unnecessary, particularly between old friends. I must go now.
Very well.
I'll collect my hat and coat. Goodbye.
Perhaps you let me have my latchkey back. I only have two, and I'm so afraid of losing them. You'll know how absent-minded I am.
And now you suddenly go like, oh, I think this friendship's over.
Yeah.
Because they're British, so nobody expresses any emotions.
You're very angry, aren't you?
No, Alec, not angry. Just disappointed.
Oof.
It's like,
almost worse.
Oh, it's terrible. And, well, in between this and the gossipy woman seeing them in the restaurant, this is like, this can't work. This is not going to work.
Eventually, real life starts to creep in and starts to make it smaller and smaller. Yeah.
Well, and what's so interesting is that, people talk about this as one of the most romantic films of all time. Yeah. Well, nothing is consummated. Like they kiss like 3 or 4 times. Yeah. Like we never get to the joy of romance. Right. It's all almost there. To me, it's sort of it's kind of like the iceberg principle, which is that it's all the things we don't see. Yeah. It's all the things that don't happen that make it so profound and stick with you. The Rachmaninoff is blasting. She's running through the night in the rain.
I felt so utterly humiliated and defeated and so dreadfully, dreadfully ashamed.
And she calls home and says, I'm not going to be home, and comes up with another lie about a sick friend or a friend with a sick mother.
It's awfully easy to lie when you know that you're trusted implicitly. So very easy and so very degrading.
Yeah.
It's truth.
It speaks about you, not about them. Yeah.
Yep. And she's still not ready to go back to the station, so she ends up at some war memorial, and she's smoking, and then a policeman sees her and is suspicious.
I walked away, trying to look casual, knowing that he was watching me. I felt like a criminal.
Gets to the refreshment room, orders a brandy, tries to write a note, can't figure out what to write, drops her head in her hands, and in comes Alec.
Darling, I've been looking for you everywhere.
Please go away, please
don't
send me. Please go away.
I can't leave you like this.
You must. It'll be better, really, it will.
You're being dreadfully cruel. It was just an accident that he came back early. He doesn't know who you are. He never even saw you.
I suppose he laughed, didn't he? I suppose you spoke of me together as men of the world.
We didn't speak of you.
Well, and this is this thing of like, she doesn't know whether or not Alec has had affairs before.
Right. But she defaults to this thing. And look, Men of the World, it's a very advanced film.
Yeah.
This conversation, this dialogue. Like it's, harkens back to what Madeline Kahn says in Young Frankenstein when she's like, 6 or 8 quick ones and you're off with the boys. And keep your mouth shut. But it's that kind of thing.
No one's connected to Young Frankenstein to Brief Encounter. You are the first.
Maybe. But, it's that idea of like women know that men talk. Men trade stories. This is why other women and mothers tell their daughters, don't sleep around. Guys talk. Don't get that reputation. Guys talk. It's never the other way around. Because it's a patriarchal society. It's never the other way around, So yeah, in this situation, even more so at this time in Britain,
Yeah. And he says, we love each other. That's all that matters. And she says, and this is the movie right here.
We know we really love each other. That's true. That's all that really matters.
It isn't all that really matters. Other things matter too. Self-respect matters and decency. I can't go on any longer.
And this is why it's a doomed romance. And she knows it. And he does too. And this is why I go, I think you have to reject the Alec as a player scenario.
Right.
Because he says,
I can't look at you now because I know something. I know that this is the beginning of the end. Not the end of my loving you, but the end of our being together.
So he's saying, we're not going to sleep together. It's not going to happen. This is going to end, and it's going to be terrible for us, and we both know that's the right thing.
Yeah.
But he still goes like, but we can't break it off right now. we gotta ease into it. Not quite yet. And then he explains that he's going to leave. He's going to leave the country.
Do you want me to stay?
you want me to turn down the offer?
Oh, don't be foolish, Alec.
I'll do whatever you say.
I love her response.
That's unkind of you, my darling.
And it's true. It's like, don't put it on me, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, yes, I can't be the person that makes that decision.
Right.
And they basically agree that we're going to see each other one more time on the next Thursday.
Forgive me
Forgive you for what?
for everything. For meeting you in the first place. For taking the piece of grit out of your eye. For loving you. For bringing you so much misery.
And her response, I'll forgive you if you'll forgive me. And what's so beautiful, she says that. The train starts to move away, and she's in the train in these great compartments we don't have anymore, where she's leaning out the window, which you can't do anymore. And the pace of that train pulling away is so perfect.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the train is not moving and the camera is on a dolly moving backwards.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Because it's just, I don't know that you can move a train that smoothly at that perfect pace.
Yeah.
And just we hear, the last thing we hear as she goes inside is Thursday.
Today was our last day together. Our very last together in all our lives. I met him outside the hospital as I had promised at 12:30. At 12:30 this morning. That was only this morning.
And they met at 12:30, and he hired a car, and they went to the same bridge, and the hours went very quickly, and now we're at the station.
As we walked through the station, I remember thinking, this is the last time with Alec. I shall see all this again, but without Alec.
And this is the moment. So Karen and I had seen this many times a long time ago. But Karen hadn't seen it in a long time. And this moment as they're walking to the station is where she remembered what was about to happen. Mm-hmm. Like, and I think even if you're seeing it for the first time, you as an audience at some point are going to put together that we're actually returning to the opening of the movie.
Right.
You know, because they arrive at the cafe and they're sitting down and they're kind of talking, not being able to talk a lot.
I wish I could think of something to say.
It doesn't matter not saying anything, I mean.
I'll miss my train and wait to see you in
No, please don't. I'll come over with you to your platform, I'd rather.
Very well.
This is the moment of the beginning of the movie.
I love you with all my heart and soul.
I want to die. If only I could die.
I love his response. If you die, you'd forget me, and I want to be remembered.
She says, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Wait, who offers to write? Is it her or him?
He does.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So she's always got to be the one that's like...
She's the stronger.
Yeah.
And he says, he looks at his watch, and he says, we've still got a few minutes.
Yeah.
And just as that few minutes comes out of his mouth, we hear Laura.
Laura, what a lovely surprise.
Yeah. Chatty Cathy.
And she walks in. And it is so like, because now you've been through all this. And, and they're building up to their final goodbye, their last moment that they ever get to see each other, they ever get to talk each other, ever get to say that they love each other. And that moment is destroyed.
Well, and it's a microcosm of the entire movie, that moment.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's like the real world has been creeping in and getting in the way of them consummating the love or fully embracing the love and letting go of everything. Like real life always creeps in at the most inopportune moment to keep it from being fully realized and for us being fully swept up in it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I think that's so important and kind of brilliant about the film as well, you know, because she comes in and just demolishes it. And she's a jackhammer just demolishing this thing.
Well, and I think when you're young, you can believe that you're going to have these a lot of these moments that are these amazing things are going to happen.
Yeah, right.
and it's not that in life we don't have some of those moments. We do.
Sure.
But most of the time as you get older, you have to learn to accept the fact that that's not going to happen. Most of life is just life.
Right.
You know, and we can hope to be ordinarily contented as she talks about her marriage.
Right.
But, you know, there's so many times where I've had this is the thought that has occurred to me as I've grown older of just like, it's not your night. Like,
not your night, kid.
It's not your night. You know, like I don't know if you've been at a party and you really wanted to cut loose and have a great time, and then you're kind of with the wrong group of people and you're not having a good. And it's like, you know what? It's not your night. Like, go home, go to sleep. It's nothing's going to happen here. It's not your night, and this is certainly not their night.
Yeah.
And of course we hear the same dialogue going on, and the camera's just pushing in on her, and the light fades out behind her, and we hear just a little bit of a very noticeable line, which is,
No sugar.
It's in the spoon.
Alec behaved so beautifully, with such perfect politeness. No one could have guessed what he was really feeling.
that is the most British line. And then what happens? The bell.
There's your train.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Once again.
Back to reality.
The train now arriving at platform 4 is the 5:40 for Shirley, Lee Green, and Langley.
Do you want to know who the announcer is for all these trains?
No.
It's Noel Coward.
Oh, nice. Okay.
She looks at him. He can barely look at her.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what we saw before.
Yeah.
And we see the exact same shot of his hand on her shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And then this shot is so great because we're framed on the door.
Yeah.
She's looking at the door and she sits right into frame. She doesn't even get the last look of him walking away from her.
Right.
She has to look at this woman.
Yeah.
Is that the train? Oh, can you tell me, is that the Ketchworth train?
No, it's the express.
And again, this very strange line.
Of course, that doesn't stop, does it?
Right.
And now, and because I don't think we thought about this.
No.
We haven't thought about this. You know, it happened at the beginning of the movie and she disappeared for some reason. We don't know what it is. And the camera is pushing in on her. There's no voiceover. And it is, as it pushes in, it starts to tilt into a Dutch angle. And then we hear the slow building screech of the train. And it is a really intense, dissonant moment. And I think in this moment, we're going, oh no.
Yeah.
You understand. And it's interesting that a movie that has been so much tell with the voiceover is also really good at show.
Yeah.
Like we know what she's thinking, and she runs out intending to kill herself, you know, and this is, you know, Anna Karenina throwing herself under the train. This is the most romantic notion, and she gets hit with a blast of air. And of course, the whole thing started with her getting hit with a blast of air and some grit in her eye from the express train, and she stops. And the shot is still in a Dutch angle. Close-up of her face with her hair blowing is amazing.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely, the camera goes back from tilted to straight.
Because she's leveling out. Yeah.
She's leveling out. She's getting back under some level of control.
Yeah.
This is a master filmmaker at the very beginning to me. You could see the moves. And what she says is so amazing. She says,
I should like to be able to say that it was the thought of you and the children that prevented me, but it wasn't. I had no thoughts at all. Only an overwhelming desire not to feel anything ever again.
and then we're back home. And we go back to her face, sitting in the chair, and Fred is staring at her. And this look of just profound compassion comes over his face.
Yeah.
And he crosses to her, and I love the staging of this because he kneels down by her chair. He doesn't sit in front of her. He kneels below her.
Yep.
Whatever your dream was, it wasn't a very happy one, was it?
And she shakes her head, no. And he says, because this is what you do when you're a husband. Is there anything I can do to help? And I love that she puts her hand on his hand.
Yeah.
Because she knows who Fred is, and she knows that he loves her. And that means something to her. It's really important. And then he says, and this line is an amazing line.
You've been a long way away. Thank you for coming back to me.
Yeah, right? Oh, such a great line, man. It's a great moment.
And she embraces him. I was funny. I was watching the second time I was watching it through with the commentary track. And, you know, commentary tracks are always mixed bags. This wasn't a terribly good one. It was okay. And I always have the subtitles on so I can kind of be paying attention to the movie while I'm listening to the commentary track. Yeah. And when it got to this moment, man, I didn't hear anything the commentary guy said for a while. And I just burst into tears again, just watching this, because thank you for coming back to me. Mm-hmm. Because we don't know what Fred knows.
Right.
But Fred not only knows something was going on, you know, he's more perceptive than maybe we might have given him credit to.
And maybe more than she might have given him credit to.
Yeah.
Before. Yeah.
But he's also okay with it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like he loves her.
Right.
It's a very almost feminist movie, you know? Like it's very much like, yes, of course you're a person and you're having your own experience and I'm sharing this life with you. Yeah, it's a really profound moment.
Yeah, I agree.
And the last thing we see is the image of a train station, and that is the end of the film.
Yeah.
We have talked 30 or 40% longer than this movie is. It's a very short film that we talked a long time on.
Yeah, there you go. That's why you come to the Cine-Files, people.
The first screening they had, a whole bunch of people laughed at the most sentimental moments.
Oof.
And David Lean was crushed.
I bet.
He felt that maybe he got the whole mood wrong. The critics really liked it. It hit just at the end of the war. It's in a strange way, in addition to being a movie about affairs and about brief encounters, it's also a movie about duty and doing what is right and doing what you are supposed to do and maintaining the social structures, even though it hurts you. And I think it fits very well into that final, weeks of World War II. It was a huge hit for Rachmaninoff, as I said. It was nominated for Best Director, Actress, Screenplay. It won none of them. One of the interesting things, I don't care that much about Rotten Tomatoes and things like that, but I'm always interested to see the difference between what the critics think and what the audiences think. Right. And this is 91% for the critics and 91% for the audiences.
There you go.
It's right even. Here's a quote that I like. This quote is from Catherine Altman, who's Robert Altman's wife. She says, "One day years ago, just after the war, Robert had nothing to do, and he went to a theater in the middle of the afternoon to see a movie. Not a Hollywood movie, a British movie. He said the main character was not glamorous, not a babe, and at first he wondered why he was even watching it. But 20 minutes later, he was in tears and had fallen in love with her. And it made him feel that it wasn't just a movie." And that film, of course, is Brief Encounter.
Wow.
So I'm curious. We've had a long conversation.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about Brief Encounter?
Well, if I'm doing my final thoughts, I will say, one of the joys of Cine-Files is you and I talking about movies. And most of the time we're talking about movies that we both feel the same way about. And we're just enjoying going through the beats and the scenes and the moments and, laughing and getting emotional or enjoying or even feeling the tragedy of these films as they go along. But this is every once in a while, and every once in a very, very long while, there is a movie that both of us come at it from different points of view, from different opinions about the movie. And this is one of those moments, or this is one of those episodes where I come out better from having had the conversation with you about the movie, appreciating the movie, respecting the movie, and understanding the movie in a better way, in a more profound way, that now I feel like this is an actually fantastic film and a film that I would actually enjoy watching all over again after our discussion. And hopefully some of you all who've maybe only given it one chance or have never found an interest in seeing it, maybe you listen, because I know a lot of you listening to us will listen to us even though you haven't seen the movie, and then go watch the movie with our perspectives in your head. So maybe some of you will take a chance on this movie who maybe were on my side and now want to give it a chance and watch it with our perspectives in your head as well. So that's what I would say. This is actually a very well done film, incredibly well acted, very poignant and tragic and emotional, a surprisingly emotional film with way more depth than you would think. And certainly a film that should be appreciated as we go forward. And now I understand why it's in the top 10, almost, and was number 2 in the British, in the eyes of the British people for quite some time, of British films. So that's my final thoughts.
So one quick thing, if you do decide to watch it again, I'd definitely watch it with Lindley.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This is a good movie to watch with your significant other.
Yeah, and occasionally say to her, "Don't you dare do this."
Yeah, exactly. This is a cautionary tale. So here's the thing I find fascinating about this movie is this movie manages to perform what I think is almost a magic act.
Okay.
Which is, in one sense, it is a movie clearly about true love.
Yes.
And it is a movie that is definitely romantic. And most of the time that you see a movie that is super romantic and about true love, it's not necessarily going to be the most realistic.
Right.
It's because and to go off into the fantasy world, the princess and the prince and the romantic, we're going to kind of leave behind sort of the realism of everyday life. And this movie is firmly grounded in realism. It's firmly grounded in real life. And in fact, it's the conflict between the real, ordinary stuff that you have to do, the kids and the home and living your life and the promises you've made and what life really is that creates the tension in the film. It's those things coming together. True love, real romance that cannot possibly exist because of our duty in our real world. And the choices... And I think in a lot of ways this is very influential on me. I hadn't thought about it before. I don't like bad guys. Like if you look at all the screenplays I've written, I really don't write bad guys. I like people that you might think are doing things that you don't like, but the more you look at them or see them from their perspective, then all the decisions they're making make sense. Right. This is a movie without bad guys. This is a movie with good people who want to do the right thing, that are caught up in something. And again, I think Celia Johnson's performance is amazing. Trevor Howard is great, and Fred is the rock. If you don't have Fred as a husband that you genuinely like, might be kind of staid and boring on some levels, but like really loves his wife, I don't think this movie works as well. And I think the craftsmanship of David Lean, the genius of him, the brilliance of Noel Coward's dialogue, and in particular Celia Johnson's performance, both with the voiceover and watching her face, is what makes this a really strong movie for me.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's what we think of Brief Encounter. Of course, we always want to hear what you think. Just do a search for the Cine-Files on Facebook to join our Facebook page. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/the Cine-Files, where you might even be able to pick our next movie. We also record now. We're doing Cine-Files shorts all the time. We're having a lot of fun talking about topics of your choosing. You can buy or stream Brief Encounter along with every other movie we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net. You can follow Cine-Files on Twitter at Cine_Files, on Instagram at the Cine-Files Podcast. I'm on Twitter as SR Morris and on Instagram at SR Morris1. John, how about you?
You can always follow me at The Roca Says on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can do so at youtube.com/John Roca Says. Some new co-hosts are coming on to my programs to kind of expand the channel. 2 female co-hosts are coming on, Alex Shashak and Sabrina Martinez. Sabrina Ramirez, rather, coming on to my channel as well to kind of, give it a little bit of a ladies vibe as well. Expand the approach. And one last thing, the Patreon, please, my Patreon, patreon.com/John Roca. We just announced 4 new shows for the Patreon, and one of them is called Criterion Corner, where I spend about 20 minutes talking about one of my favorite Criterion films and maybe encouraging you to buy it. So a lot of stuff going on there in my world. So come be a part of it, please.
Be a part of all of that, and make sure to come back next week where we'll have another great film on the Cine-Files.